Bridge with Kira is sponsored by the original Done Right Buffalo Wing Sauce. If you're looking for something spicy and different, look no further. The original Done Right Buffalo Wing Sauce is all you'll need. It's good on everything. Homemade goodness from Riverview, New Brunswick. Shipping's available, so check them out. www.dunrightbuffalowingsauce.com. Hi everyone, welcome to The Bridge. I'm your host Kira Young, and you've reached me on Revolution Radio. We're simulcasting tonight, June 25th, 2016, with Real Liberty Media, and on Tuesday we'll replay with People's Internet Radio over there in Dublin. So, we're kicking up here into high gear summer. The solstice has already passed. I hope everybody had a good one. And things are growing. I'm still working really hard on this food sovereignty project and trying to maintain my health and get healthier and healthier along the way. So as I've been talking about in these last couple of shows, I've been eating weeds, and it's working out pretty good. I had some lamb's quarters this morning with my eggs, and it just feels good to be able to eat free food. I think that's a really integral part of this food sovereignty project, is eating what grows. It's been a real revelation for me, anyway. So tonight, I have a great guest. His name is David Plate. I'm going to pull him in here. He's one of the Sync people, and so he's been engaged in some pretty serious study. I would encourage anybody who has looked into 9/11 to stick around, because he's got some really interesting insights there. As well as other world events. He's got an interesting take on things, so stick around. Let me see if I can get David in here. Hello.
Hi. Here, let me make sure my volume is set and everything to a good level.
Welcome.
So are we live right now?
Yes, we are. We're live.
Hello.
Welcome to The Bridge. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me this afternoon. I was telling everybody that you have a different, well, not different, but you have a very interesting take on world events, and I encourage people to stick around who are who've been interested in the past guests, Sinky people and Sinky things. Um, so I did not get a chance to read the Zohar prophecy, and it is like handwritten.
Right. It's in longhand.
Yeah.
Eventually, it'll all be typed out, but I'm not quite there yet.
Why don't you explain the study that you're engaged in, this long-term, intense study that you're engaged in, so people get an idea of where you're coming from with your insights?
Sure. Well, I started out studying European occultism, classic, like Aleister Crowley, Israel Regardie, and all of that. I mean, I was raised studying the Torah, but not in Hebrew. I came from kind of an academic situation. I went to a Christian school, which I eventually got expelled from in junior high, but it kind of set the course for the rest of my life. And though it was kind of traumatic in a way to deal with crazy dogma, I had certain teachers that were really amazing. Like when I was in third grade, we were analyzing Lord of the Rings. We read Lord of the Rings together, and we would go chapter by chapter and do kind of these assignments where we had to use our critical thinking and see how different symbolism related to the Bible. And it wasn't in the curriculum. It was like a teacher that was just, there in the midst of all these, dogmatic kind of lunatics. And she really impacted me. I've been impacted by different people throughout my life. I had a tutor that introduced me to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I was failing math when I was in high school, and this guy I went from getting F's in math, literally D's and F's, to getting A's and A pluses. And I never thought that would be possible, but he taught me that we discovered numbers and that we didn't invent them. We invented the symbols to represent those numbers, but that the numbers themselves are actually alive. And that was something that just made me fascinated with mathematics. And so I'm ultimately no mathematician, but gematria is a big part of what I do with my teacher now. And so I've been studying Zohar for the last 11 years with an elderly rabbi. And in the last, year and a half or so, I brought him this prophecy that I found, and he'd been studying Zohar for years and years and years and years. And he didn't even think that there was a prophecy in the Zohar, and this is the only one we know of. But it's substantiated all of our work. Jake Kotza, everybody who's presented the idea that we're looking at a mega ritual, that idea becomes explicit in the text because it gives the actual date, not in code, but literally and directly. And the commentary from the late 15th, early 16th century by the Ramak, emphasizes these certain points of what the significance of 9/11 is, why it's 9/11. It's a reversal of Tisha B'Av, which is the day that Jews acknowledge the destruction of the temple. And so the 9th day of the 11th month in the Hebrew calendar. But in this text, in this prophecy, it gives the equivalent date in the Gregorian calendar, which in the Hebrew calendar looks random. It's like, whatever, but when you translate it to ours, you see the significance. And so it's basically what was just for the Jews way back when ends up affecting the whole world. But everything requires so much context. It's really difficult. And I can see why people wouldn't want to just spill it because, it's so easy to make so many assumptions, because if you don't continue on with the text, like if you read the first part of that text that I've transcribed, it comes across like propaganda or something, because it's like Israel will act mightily and this and that. And I'm like, I don't know if in Zionism or whatever, if they're showing them this text and not giving them the rest of the context, because it goes on to describe how, Israel is worshiping another name essentially. And it tells you how to see what that name will be, because it's not even at the time necessarily. It's just like, in the long run, the way that the Hebrew letters will correspond to the pathways in the mystery schools, and there's a way to prove it. And I decoded it, and it absolutely blew my mind. So, like, it's all about the diagonal pathways of the tree of life, and unfortunately, it's hard to jump into this, and just like really give it a context, because if people aren't familiar with a lot of the ins and the outs of the basics of Kabbalah, it becomes rather difficult. But there's different lines as they appear on the tree of life. So if you've seen the Kabbalistic tree of life, there's these pathways that connect the Sefirot. And so the diagonals are, one set of pathways. And so there's 12 diagonals. But really, ultimately, there's 13. And that's, if you look at what connects Keter, the crown, to Tiferet, the heart in the tree, that's Gimel. And so there's this thing where they're saying, add up the diagonals in this prophecy, it says, and you'll see the significance. And so I went ahead and I did that according to the current system, not the traditional one from the Ari or anything. I took what is now used by the OTO and the Golden Dawn, and I saw that it equaled 865. And I then saw that if you add the 13th pathway, which isn't a diagonal, Gimel, which is 3, you get 868. And the only word in all of Hebrew that I can find that equals that in Gematria is the word from the first line of the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formations, the sacred book in Kabbalah, second to the Zohar, or I guess you wouldn't say second, they're like equal. It's the word for the pathways from the first line of the book. It's like speaking to the mystical pathways of the tree of life, and so you know that that's it. But it's a trick because it's like a crazy joke. That's not these are dimensions. So if you have a horizontal pathway, that's one dimension of relating to something. The vertical is a spiritual dimension. The diagonals are in between. And so what you can see is that, the builders of the empire have literally taken something that's spiritual and they're relating to it as though it were something else. And so this is the high priestess. If you apply the tarot arcana, there's 22 Hebrew letters, there's 22 trump cards. And so the trump card that relates to that pathway in the current system is the high priestess, and she crosses the empress. So you see this cross, and this cross is a sacrifice between the supernal and the terrestrial. It's what connects the two. But in the formation of the 777 pathway, if you add up the line that's the flow, the emanated flow of creation, as it's expressed in the Sefer Yetzirah, in the current model of the attributions of the letters to the tree, you get this, the Gematria ends up equaling 777. And so it's this fascinating thing, because in order to get from the supernal to the terrestrial, you have to do an impossible move, which is create this diagonal. But there is no pathway there except for the horizontal. And so they treat the high priestess as though she were this diagonal, even though she's not. And so this then is tied to the Bible verse of, the stone that the builders rejected will be the keystone of the temple. And so it's this idea where if you have an archway, you have a center stone. In Freemasonry, this is related to as the cornerstone, because they've moved it off to the corner. It's no longer the center, because for the empire to exist as it does requires the suppression of the feminine principle of receptivity, right? So, which has to do with the right brain. When you're looking at the two pillars of the terrestrial realm on the tree of life, what the text is emphasizing is you're literally looking at the two hemispheres of the collective brain. And so that's why if you go into any Sefirot, you find another 10th Sefirot. It's basically describing this fractal. But it's emphasizing too that it's not like Mandelbrot's set, where if you go into any part and you see the whole, it's an exact replicant. It is emphasizing that it's the same dynamics with a different appearance. And so it's why you'd have people come out of people. You could argue that that's a fractal, but every person is a variation. It's endless expression, but with the same dynamics. And so it's emphasizing these dynamics, and then it's emphasizing that what we see on this day when we see these two towers collapse is our closest replication in form of basically the two aspects of ourselves. And that's why one falls at a certain point, and then the other one falls to one tower was slightly taller than the other, which is how Freemasons represent this in a tracing board, because it's emphasizing that when things come into form, it spirals first from the right, and then the left replicates it. And what we're seeing in our society is an emphasis on the left side as though it were dominant. And so Crowley references this with love is the law, love under will. But what is under is actually the power. And so people think what's on top has the power, but it's not actually so. It has to do with something dependent upon something that's below it. And so the way that this is expressed as a pyramid of society is that the top can't exist without the cooperation of the bottom, which requires a mass manipulation. And so, but it gets interesting because it seems to, Kubrick used to reference this with the CRM 114 thing, because CRM is Hebrew, it's haram, it means a necessary sacrifice. If you add the 114 to the grammatical value of CRM, which I believe is 248, you get a Hebrew word which means a burden. And so it seems to suggest from him, I mean, this is just inference, but it seems as though he's communicating that it's a burden to be aware of this necessary sacrifice, that this is serving a higher function in terms of evolution, because we're not looking at a well-intentioned temple, we're looking at something that has to do with trade. And so it's fast. The text also gives the exact time for the establishment of the TSA. It says 68 days after this event takes place, the nation who has these towers collapse will show up at the border of every nation around the world to impose unjust laws, and that this will be the beginning of a one world government. When we get to the point where we have that one world government, the flaws will be seen overtly, and so that action itself removes the veil, because we see, this isn't the thing, this is a replication of the thing, and that has like a rippling effect in consciousness. But the big point that the whole thing is emphasizing is that for us to watch these towers collapse, we all see what it is before our left brain has even recognized what we are aware of. So it's like the thing is done, and then it requires catching up. It's like a crack in the perfect empire, and so it ends up liberating our consciousness through seeing that crack. So our right brain knows that those buildings just fucking disintegrated, and that doesn't follow any rule of any standard demolition, right? I mean, they literally turned to dust. The cars along, what is it, Dr. Judy Wood points out that the cars surrounding the area were burnt to a crisp. The handles are melted, yet there's trees that are completely unsinged. There's 14 survivors in Building 2. Survivors described light coming in from above. They're on the second floor of a collapsing building, and they see light from above. It's absolutely impossible. I mean, there's giant holes in these buildings. So what are we looking at? It seems to be some kind of energy weapon or some kind of thing, and it's in our face. Everyone watched it. They know that it's impossible on a basic level, but the point is that truth wins ultimately. It's just a matter of time. So you got to kind of take the long view, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And so what do you think, looking at this, that why did they have to do this big ritual? What do they get out of it? The puppet masters, so to speak, the psychopaths in charge. What do they get out of it? Right.
Well, the big issue is that we're not dealing with like bad guys and good guys. Like, this isn't like a movie. This is just like a bunch of people who have all kinds of different agendas, and everything is happening all at once. So it's this big convoluted mess. And I would love it if more, if you want to go into false flag terrorism, which is obviously what we're looking at, and, Crowley, there's an incredible empirical book called, Secret Agent 666. Weiser stopped publishing all Crowley's stuff right after this book came out. I mean, correlation doesn't equal causation, but I found that very suspicious, because he was one of the main people responsible for spinning the propaganda of the sinking of the Lusitania, which, contemporarily speaking was, that's what got the U.S. and Britain involved in World War I, through basically playing on people's emotions, so there's these manipulative aspects to the thing, but it's not like these events are real events. So if you say something like, if you want to look at Crisis Cast connection to G4S with this recent Orlando shooting and stuff, it's like you have actors, and we know that there's actors involved and they're being interviewed and all this stuff. does it mean that no one got injured? We don't know. So if you go to watch a YouTube video and they start out the thing saying, no one got injured in this authoritative way or whatever, and that the whole thing is fake, we don't know that. And that feels really arrogant to me to assume. I questioned with Sandy Hook whether anyone died because all those death records are held. They passed a law in Massachusetts that you can't, was it Massachusetts, I guess, Sandy Hook? Anyways, Connecticut, excuse me. They passed a law like a year before that you can't look at death records. And so if we don't see the bodies, what are we supposed to do? It's like, I don't know, but I wouldn't argue with Orlando. I don't know how many people died or what's what, but what I can, assess is that it certainly seems as though there's really fake elements involved. And that creates a lot of confusion because there's also reality involved. So there are lines in the sand. Where does one end and the other begin? It becomes really difficult. But, I think that we're dealing with dualities that need to be transcended. And there's no way to transcend those without going directly through the muck, so to speak. And so that we see that in this text that we're looking at where they're describing the 216 letter name. I don't know if you studied Kabbalah much or are familiar with the significance of that. If you've ever seen Pi, that's why he's after the 216 letter name in the stock market and all of this. But 216 is the gematria value of Gevurah, which is severity. It's the left pillar of the tree of life. And it's related in the Ba here as a big red eye. So basically the text is describing these people paying homage to this eye, which they relate to as the strength. But the real strength is in what the eye depends on. So it's like a dimmuned light or whatever. It's not the real light. It's like a kind of a substitute for the meantime in this separation, And so 216 obviously is 6 times 6 times 6. I find it fascinating that if you do 7 plus 7 plus 7 to that, you end up with 237, which, obviously, Stanley Kubrick related to the moon, and Scott Onstadt for that matter, which is really interesting. But the moon is chesed, it's mercy, it's opposite Gevurah on the tree. So if you look at in Hebrew the gematria value of a man, I forget what it is in the Hebrew. I'm kind of bad right now, but the number of a man in Hebrew is 216. So when you're looking at the Book of Revelations in Greek, it's referencing the Hebrew when it says this is the number of a man. It's really straightforward. So that's the joke of HAL in 2001. If you add up the simple English gematria of the titles of 2001: A Space Odyssey, they total 777. So if you're like the Dawn of Man, Jupiter Mission 18 months later, Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite, it totals 777. And also the film itself moves through the 4 worlds in order as they appear on the Tree of Life. So it's absolutely crazy. That came from Horst Leverfat at Subliminal Synchrosphere. He put that together. And Alex Fulton has this whole thing with Kubrick and 666, which is just unbelievable. Somebody figured out that, I forget the name, but figured out that 666 days after Stanley Kubrick's death was 1101. So it's the first day of 2001. But then Alex Fulton's girlfriend suggested to him, she's like, well, what happened 666 days before? And so he goes and he looks it up, and sure enough, that was the first time that a computer beat a man at chess. The computer was named Big Blue and was overtly designed after HAL from 2001. And so, if you watch 2001, you see HAL cheat at chess, the thing just becomes so ridiculous because you're like, wait a minute, so you mean to tell me that that the artificial intelligence, the point at which it first, in a technical way, became superior on that level, on the level of HAL, that day was 666 days before his death, and he stands between. And this relates directly to the 3 pillars of the Tree of Life, because the gematria value of Chesed is 72. So you got 3 pillars, and so you're like 72 plus 72 plus 72 equals 216, which is Gevurah. And so the 216 letter name is derived from the book of Exodus, where Moses parts the waters, right? And he does this kind of poetry thing before that happens, and it's 3 verses in a row that are each are 72 letters long. And so rabbis have utilized that for a long time, relating to it that you read the first verse forwards from right to left, you read the second verse left to right, and then you read the third right to left again. And so this communicates the three pillars, and the parting of the waters is there. But what we're looking at in the prophecy, speaking to the 216 letter name, is it's suggesting that so it's like you're on one level of existence and you see, okay, well, this is the way things are, right to left. And then when you dig deeper and you're seeing the corruption and how everything's twisted and backwards, which would, be related to the klipot and the diagonal pathways of the tree, then you're like, oh my God, this is like this well-organized, cabal, that came later. Kabbalah actually means to receive. It's much different than what a cabal is. That's the distinction between a mystery and a secret, if you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. A mystery is open to anybody. A secret, it's like you have to get in on the secret organization to be given the real, this is readily available. It's like Scott Onslaught would say, it's a secret in plain sight, right? But it's acknowledging that when you pierce the veil of that level, and you get to the next 72 and you're going the opposite direction, because you see that underlying this apparent order, which seems absolutely terrifying, that below that there's a higher order. And so I find it fascinating that so many of us that are involved in the synchronicity community, we started with conspiracy theory and went really deep. And that's why I'd say that there's no way beyond except directly through. It's because if you follow through, you find impossible things, like with what just happened with the stock market, with the 777 thing. I don't know if you saw that. There was I
did, yeah. Definitely get into that, because I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, it completely blew my mind. I was really impressed by it. Michael von Bell put this thing together where he's saying there are a couple posts here about Brexit, excuse me. I don't know everything about the stock market, but maybe this hasn't caught anyone's attention yet. 7-year cycle of market crashes called the Shemitah. It is not so long ago when I actually was researching this, maybe some 3 weeks or so, and now it seemed to start rolling. Brexit is only the beginning. Brexit market crash 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks, and 7 days after the 777 point crash of 9/29/2008. Take a look for yourself. But he went to the site, which is what Alex Fulton often uses to determine these things, where you can see what the exact amount of time is between any two dates. It's a calculator. And so he has an article from CBS News, stocks take record tumble, down 777 points. Shemitah, so he has this, he's talking about an earlier post he did about Michael Jackson and 7 plus 777 sinks, it's pretty incredible. But the thing is it's the meaning. The number isn't the point. It's like what Max says in Pi. It's the syntax. It's what's between the numbers. 777 is specific in regards to the formative order of the tree of life. And there's two orders. There's sustaining order, which has to do with the 216 and the 6 times 6 times 6. It's the left side of the tree. It's how the klipot, or the shells that enshroud holiness, move through the tree, is through these diagonal pathways. And so that appears to be symmetrical, but it's an appearance. And that's the joke in Freemasonry of having one pillar slightly taller than the other. In this case, we're looking at something that's implying the significance of the formative order, that it's like it's coming from the right to the left. And this has to do with ourselves, that our left brain is interpreting something that our right brain actually is receiving initially. And so it's trying to give expression and understand something on a certain level, but for us to take that as the more significance is absolutely backwards. This is obviously communicated in the Matrix when he's handed the two pills, mm-hmm. and you can see him reach out with his right hand in the reflection of Morpheus's glasses for the red. So he's reaching with his right hand, but in between the cuts, you can see he's reaching with his left. And so they're communicating the nature of the mirror. It's like if you reach out and you touch a mirror with your right hand, you're not looking at your right hand touching your left hand. You're still looking at your right hand. So it's saying this is an appearance. And I actually feel that this was the whole basis of Through the Looking Glass. I mean, Lewis Carroll was a mathematician. Like, this is communicated in Eyes Wide Shut, you know, with Nicole Kidman's eye and the way that the poster was made. And there's this phenomenon of, like, the release date of Eyes Wide Shut, which is the last thing Kubrick emphasized before his death, had to be this date. It's a year to the day before Bohemian Grove was infiltrated. So that night where you see that crazy giant owl and the mock sacrifice or whatever that is, that's a year to the day from the release of Eyes Wide Shut. But the guy who was doing that documentary, John Robson, I believe, I'm sorry if I'm getting the name wrong, but that guy is the only guy at that time who was ever given access to all of Kubrick's archives. He did a documentary called Kubrick's Boxes. That was his project. I mean, Alex Jones, whatever, took the camera and went in. He physically infiltrated it, but the guy whose project that really was, which is weird too, because I found this on IMDb a couple years back and it blew me away. And now I don't even see the guy's name on IMDb in regards to his own documentary. Though if you watch the documentary, he's actually on it. You can see it's him, you know, and I'm just like, wow, that's weird. You know, they took his name out, even though it's his fucking project. And so that kind of blew my mind. But yeah, it's just, there's these things that shouldn't, like, they go beyond any standard conspiracy theory where you're like, how is that even possible? It's a complete mindfuck. And my feeling on the matter, as far out as it sounds, is that this has to do with what's really our vantage point. We're relating that our vantage point is the left side, which is the severity. And so when you're looking at the ascent back up the tree, you see a further emphasis on the severity, which really contains its own replication of the opposites within itself. Because within every spheroid, there's a tree, right? And so it's got its own replication of the opposites that it's relating to. But these are just symbolic representations that it itself is projecting. And so this is what these people are paying homage to, even though the whole thing is absolutely destined to collapse. And that's ultimately a good thing, you know, even though it's an enormous sacrifice. Because, you know, to have it's like alchemy. You separate, you coagulate, and you reunite, right? So there's this necessary coagulation, and we're afraid of it, just like we're afraid of mutation. We see the first expressions of mutation, and we recoil in horror. We're like, oh my God. But what this is emphasizing, what we see with the stock market, it's a perfect example, because like what's said in Pi is you got 1 million human hands at work, 1 million minds. This is a natural organism. But it should be chaos. It should be random. And so when you see this level of order emerging from it, not just that it's an order, it's the specific communication that has to do with the formative order of the tree. You can see that it's like that there's an organizing principle behind the thing, and that it's not actually chaos. And so this text that we're looking at, as far as like Orthodox Judaism is concerned, would be considered kind of blasphemous in a way, because it's suggesting that the klipot, though they're chaotic, actually have a directive from on high, that there's basically like a field of possibilities that they're working with. It's like there's the roots of the tree, and then there's the branches, and the branches kind of go off and they do their own thing, but the thing that they're doing is still ultimately within a framework, and they can't escape the framework. And so it's worded in a way that it wants to emphasize that this isn't a cause for rationalization. Like, it's not like, oh, it doesn't matter whatever you do, because obviously it does. And that's why, you know, if you say, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, Crowley would say over and over again, that doesn't mean do whatever you want, even though he would. But he also emphasized he's not the representative of this new consciousness that's emerging. He's not it. He's just the messenger. Similar to, Jesus would say the Son of Man over and over again, and Christians, especially fundamentalist Christians, want to take it that he's talking about himself. When there's no basis for that, he's not talking about himself in the third person. He's talking about somebody else. I got to be careful. I can't relate Crowley to Jesus. Some people might get upset even if they're not Christian.
I just got a little message from the management. I'm prone to this too, but we're not allowed to do F-bombs on here because we're subject
Oh
to
my goodness gracious! I'm used to
FCC.
always record.
Yeah, I know, I am too. And then all the other stations I've been on, it hasn't been an issue, so I don't even hear it.
I didn't even know that I said it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's completely like, it's funny actually. That's ironic because I'm here talking about the formative order, which is communicated as this lightning flash, while the F word itself, I guess the consensus around its etymological roots is actually to strike. There's different variations of what people feel it came from, but I believe it's like frickin' or something like that. It's German. And so I always relate it, like when I'm saying it, that it's like a lightning flash,
I just saw a dictionary, to strike or tap. No, I don't know, but no worries. We'll just try to watch that from now on.
Oh yeah, no, I'm so used to. See, I never. It wasn't my idea to do a radio show. It was Bill's idea, Bill Klaus, and he approached Alan. He approached me, and at first I was actually kind of resistant to the idea because I'm often turned off by radio shows when they start out like YouTube videos where it's like they say their conclusion before they've even gone through the steps. Oftentimes the steps that they're going through don't prove their conclusion because it's like all these correlations. And so I kind of set this intention where I was like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we're not going to participate in this jump to conclusions board kind of mentality. It was really important to me. I feel like it doesn't allow for real detective work. Like a real detective just keeps following what's emerging, but doesn't take an ultimate position until it reaches a certain crescendo. And I feel like a lot of people cut themselves short in that way.
Yeah.
I think Alex Jones, as eccentric and crazy as he is, makes a lot of really fascinating points. And then you can cross-reference, and sometimes they check out, and a lot of times they don't. You got to chew up the meat and spit out the bones, but it's the intense authority behind it, that really annoys the heck out of me.
Yeah, and the dramatic music and things like that too, when he does TV or visual stuff.
Totally.
Yeah.
It really takes away from it. But what's really unfortunate is that kind of sensationalism is what gets people's attention and grabs people's interest. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to do propaganda. I want to,
Yeah.
I want to get beyond that, and I'm waiting for that to happen more in that field, of research.
There's a reason that we call it processing, right? Information, because there is a process that your brain has to go through to, build upon and reach conclusions. So you can't, it's just like science is now, where the hypothesis, you're supposed to have this hypothesis, and then you have this rigorous system by which you either prove or disprove the hypothesis, right?
Right, which is still going to be inference, even after all is said and done.
Right, right. But now you can only get funding for a certain set of hypothesis. Or, I don't know what the plural of hypothesis is. Hypothesi? I don't know. You can only get funding, and like you kind of have your conclusion to begin with. And I think it's the same in media. You're supposed to have that conclusion to begin with, and people get used to it. And actually, it's uncomfortable in the beginning when people first get into, where are they going with this information? This is, a lot of people can't listen to people talk for 2 hours. They're like, well, they're just blabbering on, it's interesting, but where are they going with it? And it's like, for me, that's the fun. Where's this going to go?
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
It's exciting
to
not know.
It is.
What would be the value of knowing what it's going to be before you've even done the real work? I mean, Krishnamurti would emphasize that over and over again, and so would David Bohm, and that's like the whole basis for, on dialogue and whatnot. It's like, if you're going to approach this thing, you can't start out with, it's like, the unknown is the unknown. That's the thing about the unknown, if you're projecting what the unknown is before you started, you just end up with, some kind of a representational model that suits your preconceived notions. And that's not real analysis. That's something else. But this ties completely into what I'm emphasizing about these two pillars, is that these are two aspects of ourselves, and one has become so excessively dominant. It's like people don't even see the value in the other side. They don't even know what it looks like, because all we're looking at is our representational models of the other side and not the thing in itself. And so what this text is describing is these polarities that go back and forth, or they're mutually interdependent. But the one side that thinks it's the strength, when it finally goes to really cross over the line, so this is the pathway on the tree, it's strength. If you're applying the arcana, right, which is Oz. The Hebrew for strength is Oz. It's the basis of the Wizard of Oz. Its geometrical value is 77. So you have the 777 lightning flash descending the tree, and then the wire, so to speak, that connects the two towers. That pathway is a question of what is real strength. And so I'm sure this sounds silly to some people, but Joe produced this Back to the Future Predicts 9/11 thing, and he was in Santa Cruz at the time. He was told he could play basketball in all these different places around the world. He's been playing in Russia for years and stuff, and if you wanted to play professionally, you'd have to play overseas. And they said, or you can play for the Santa Cruz Warriors. And he knew I was here, and he actually made that decision so that we could sync out together, which I'm really grateful for it. We had some good times. I shared with him all of these films I was doing and just laid out all my work I'm doing with Baruch, and he met my rabbi several times and all this stuff. But it blew my mind when he produced Back to the Future Predicts 9/11, because it was like the perfect symbolic communication of this prophecy that I'm studying, where you have, Robert Zemeckis 30 years later produces this film of The Walk. And what The Walk communicates is this whole issue of strength, because he's crossing from one pillar of the tree to the other, and that's what this text is emphasizing. This is a expression in form of this dynamic of consciousness. And so, but if you watch a series of Back to the Future and you get to the last scene of Back to the Future 3, what is the point? What is the moral of the whole story? It's Marty McFly turning that truck around. So he is being told over and over again that he's chicken, and he has to prove that he's not chicken over and over again. And his reconciliation or his own redemption is the point at which he can turn. Redemption in Hebrew literally means a turning. He needs to turn around, and so he flips his truck. He's not gonna race these guys, because every time he does, it just creates more of the problem. So, and this is the issue of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi and all of these great figures who were, sacrificed, but their message is still here, which is, it means and end have to be identical. If you're trying to reach an end and your means isn't that end, you're just going to have more of the same. And until human beings get to the point where they recognize this simple issue, we're just playing out this cycle over and over and over again, And so, I take that as the significance of this pathway between the severity and the mercy, between Gevurah and Chesed, the red and the blue, right? And so, the whole point is that the one thinks it's going to swallow the other. So it's arrogance, so the left side thinks it's dominant. And so when it goes over finally to swallow it up, which is literally how it's described in this text, it itself gets swallowed and transmutated into this other thing. And so what I'm doing is I've been, transcribing so much. It's available in my longhand, if anyone wants to look at it, which is, a lot of Kabbalistic terminology that I'm not sure everyone is familiar with, or I guess most people aren't. But that point is communicated where it's like something is foundational to the other thing, and it's denying its own foundation. It's like, if you're relying on your own mother and you're like not, recognizing your own dependence, it's going to cause some difficulty, So they're denying their base, the elite, and so they get swallowed up and transmutated into something else, and so it's communicated on one dimension. On one dimension is the horizontal, but when that crosses, when the two sides merge, then this other dimension, which is vertical, it gets lifted and transformed simultaneously, because the two dimensions are mutually interdependent. And so that's a miracle. It's describing, it predicts the first two world wars, this text, which is amazing. It's emphasizing why these two wars are distinct from all others, because they're global, and they're leading up to the destruction of these towers. And it's like, when these towers collapse, then you're eventually going to have this third war emerge, which is conjunct into the one world. It's so crazy, because it's like every conspiracy theory video you watch on YouTube, it's like explicit in this text. For everything with the Illuminati eye and what the significance is and everything. And it's describing this third world war where the soldiers who are fighting that war are brought to sorrow. Their sorrow emerges. And so it seems to be communicating the nature of character armor, that we have a deep pain and we cover up that pain with aggression, and we relate to that aggression like it's the dominant thing, but really it's very weak. And so when you bring things to a certain threshold and they reach their ultimate end, they go back to the beginning in a sense, but when they go back, they're transformed. It's a type of alchemy. And so it's describing this deep sorrow that the whole world feels. And it's like tears from the supernal come through, and that's the giant variable that, the powers that be can't account for. But what's blowing my mind is it's like, this is in this text. If you continue on with this text beyond the first section, which feels like weird propaganda, even though its state of Israel isn't till 1948, right? So it's like, it's not talking about, seems to be describing a state, because it's describing how, the Israelis are relating to this Qliphotic name, which is the ninth gate. It's the formation. I mean, this is all very complex, but if you arrange the 22 Hebrew letters as a Vesica Piscis, right, just in a regular order, you end up with Aleph on one side, the first Hebrew letter, and you end up with Lamed on the other. So they're like flanking this name. And so that's El, as in Elohim. So this is the name of God, and it's saying this is also a gate. There's these different gates. And saying, if you want the sweetest judgments, this is the gate you go through. You don't rearrange the letters. And so it's communicating that this is the thing with Babylon, that no one can understand each other's speech, is it has to do with the malleability of this name. And so they've chosen a specific gate, and this is prophesized in the text, and it's literally the ninth formation. And so there's this, if you turn it, and Crowley communicated this with his arrangement of the cards, because he made strength, lust, and moved it over so that if you just arrange the cards according to their letters and you ignore the Roman numerals, then you end up with this other name, and it's flanked by Resh, which is the sun on the one side, where before you'd have Aleph, and Tet, which is Leo, on the other. So Leo and the sun, the sun rules Leo or whatever, so you're like, that's the beast. You see it on the card. You got the beast of the apocalypse and the scarlet woman or whatever, and then you got the sun on the other side. This is not the sun. This is relating to Gevurah. And so it's describing this gate. If you add up the letters that are on top of each other in that formation, each one across the whole row will equal 9, except for the first two, which both equal 4. And then he had these 3 extra cards of the Magus, right? So you have Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice-born Hermes, right? And so if you look at it and you say, 144, that's the 9th number of the Fibonacci sequence. And so I don't know if you've looked at the significance of the number 9. There's an
Oh,
incredible
yeah.
video. I forget what it's called, but that's a real, that can prove, literally prove, it's a real thing that we discovered numbers and we didn't invent them, because there's no way in hell that could happen on its own. And so the gematria value of the tree of life itself, Yetzer Chaim, is 144. This is communicated in the film Pi, except they did a trick, because they say, oh, the value of Eden is 233, which isn't actually true. 233 is the value of the east. It's where Adam and Eve exit the garden. And so if you divide 144, 233, you end up with the golden spiral, right? And so it's the 10th number in the Fibonacci sequence, is 233. And so it's showing you this relationship. Fibonacci wasn't around until long after the Torah. So what the heck, and this ties directly into the Babylonian sun square, where if you turn the square into a cylinder, you can form these steps if you move up diagonally. And this is communicated in the tree of life as the diagonal pathways through which the Klipot take over the tree and manipulate perception. And so, it sounds like a crazy crystal hippie thing if you say we're going to move into another dimension or some kind of rationalization for what's happening. But, we're like, oh, we're destroying the planet. It's not negating that we're destroying the planet, but at the same time, the ultimate truth is that time isn't linear. The thing has already happened in the midst. It's like from the perspective of the supernal, the work is already done. Like if we were the dinosaurs and we were looking at where we're headed, we had no idea. The dinosaurs couldn't have predicted us, and in a similar way, we're not able to predict the next species that we are actually giving birth to. And this is the meaning of the Moonchild. So Oppenheimer and Jack Parsons and these people that are rationalizing what they're doing. I mean, every time a rocket went off, Jack Parsons did a hymn to Pan. I mean, he's Crowley's successor. So it's like, this is the head of JPL doing this, occult working. And it's like, how could these people rationalize this? It feels absolutely absurd. It's like, are these people just evil? It's like, Oppenheimer seems pretty evil. I mean, why would you do that? You split the atom, what's involved, all this stuff, but it's from where they're coming from. They trust that there's a organizing principle behind the expression, and that no matter how far we move away from the source, it's still the directive, and it still has the real power. And so they know that no matter what happens, things will be reorganized in a higher expression, no matter how far we debase ourselves. And that's a really tough one, because you simultaneously need to emphasize that this does not mean anything goes. I would never want to be somebody like, I think it's terrible. 9/11 is beyond, there's no words. It's an absolute tragedy. At the same time, birth of tragedy, Dionysus and Apollo are mutually interdependent. For every Apollonian movement, there's a conjoined Dionysian reflex simultaneously. I mean, the two play off of each other. And so if you go so far in this direction, it's absolutely compensated. And so they trust it that much. And so, it's difficult. It's like, I don't condone what they're doing, but when something's done and what's done is done, it's like, okay,
there's something to be learned from it, regardless.
Yeah.
It's
hard to qualify, and I hope and pray people hear what I'm saying, if anybody, because, Zionism is not Judaism. It's a political ideology, and it's a real problem in the world, just like a lot of political ideologies are a real problem. And in my opinion, it's absolutely insane, and at the same time, I want to look at the thing and trust that I'm doing what I can do, and which isn't much, and I'm like, well, there's a certain futility involved here. I myself don't feel like I'm able to stop the Zionist movement. I find it just, it's the worst, but it's there. And so what is going to come of this ultimately, So there's this phenomenon where I realized this weird thing where if you look at the dollar bill above the eagle's head, which was originally a phoenix, right? And there's this formation of 13 stars forming a six-pointed star. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So if you continue on with that formation until you hit the next equilibrium, I forget what the actual numbers are initially, but if you keep building around that shape, when you get to the ninth formation of that, it's 541. It's the geometrical value of Israel.
We're gonna take a quick break, and we'll get back to this in 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome back to the second hour of The Bridge with Kira. I'm your host, Kira Young, and you've reached me on Revolution Radio, and we will be replaying this show on People's Internet Radio on Tuesday night, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. My guest is David Plate. Welcome back, David.
Hi.
Hey, so you got cut off for the break there. You want to start?
I was on one.
You were you were going places with that. So let's start from where you were at before we left. If you want to start over a little bit,
I've 2 cups of coffee, by the way. So.
I'm drinking a bunch too.
I just want to get in as much information as I'm able while I have the opportunity. You know, it's like I got a lot to share, and there's just so much. You know, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. You're one of my favorites. I feel like your show is kind of like the bridge on the River Kira.
Oh my goodness! Thank you so much. I love having you.
Which is actually kind of appropriate to, apparently there's going to be these bridges between the 2 towers, and the explanation that was given for not actually doing that was that it would interfere with the harmonics, that they're supposed to be like these tuning forks. I don't know if you ever heard that before.
Yes, that's vaguely familiar that I've heard.
Alan Apodessa, he talks about that quite a bit.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but that really reminds me of you want to connect the towers with pathways. Which for them would be a symbolic thing, but it would interfere with the effect that they're. I mean, it seems as though those towers were designed to collapse, which is really unbelievable. So just getting back to what I was speaking to before, that image above the eagle, this blew my mind. If you continue with that formation from the 13 and you keep doing, you keep extending it, when you get to the 9th formation of equilibrium, you end up with the geometrical value of Israel. And so it relates directly to this 9th gate. That is another name, another combination of the letters that they're relating to. It has to do with the dynamics of the vacuum of space. As far out as that sounds, that seems to be what's going on. And
and the immediate thing that my mind goes to with that is what you were talking about before, how things just disintegrated.
Right.
And so whatever this device was, or whatever caused that particular calculation or understanding needed to be known in order to create that destruction.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it's some sort of free energy thing. Mm-hmm. And why are we using it to destroy? Right. When it's I know scarcity equals control, and there's all these, it has enormous implications that are really profound. Dr. Judy Wood, I recommend her work to anybody who's interested in looking into that, because it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest things about her work, well, she created that word dustification, right, to describe what happened to those buildings. And she showed how whatever it was reacted with metal and not with other things. And so you could see how, and only up to a certain point. So there were some vehicles that were completely, singed and rusted, and then the other half was perfectly like it was new.
Right. It's the opposite of a hydrogen bomb, right?
Right.
Because you can have buildings get when people get destroyed, organisms get destroyed, yet the buildings are left okay. I guess that's
right.
The neutron bomb. I forget. I'm no expert. But anyways, yeah, it seems to be the opposite principle, which is just like, whoa. But yeah, the Millennium Hilton, it's a building that was designed. It's right there at Ground Zero. It was modeled overtly after the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. The fact that they called it the Millennium Hilton, and that when Haywood Floyd in 2001 is having that talk about the he has the cover story that he's presenting about what's the epidemic that's broken out on Clavius on the moon, which is a bullshit. Is a fake story that he's giving to these people. It's a cover story. We're looking at in the background. You can see this big sign that says Hilton with a man at a desk. That looks like the monolith. Whatever. It's got a little plane up there. But what in the heck? If you watch the show Mad Men, there was this whole thing with the Mr. Hilton wanting in all of his advertising references to the moon, and apparently that was true. And I find it very strange that you'd have this connection existing there at 9/11. There's also the Oculus. Are you familiar with that giant piece of artwork at Ground Zero that is a giant eye that they say is a dove? So there's this giant dove thing, and it's an eye that opens up once a year on 9/11, and people can go and watch it. It's just extraordinary. But it only opens up between the time of when the first planes hit the building, so the first plane hits the building, until the moment that the building collapsed. And so, this huge thing opens up, but it's overtly the signature symbol of the OTO. And so, we have that Vesica Piscis with the dove and the chalice, and it's like, that's what I feel I'm looking at, but there's a very strong argument that, when it comes to who's behind this thing, it seems like they left their signature, but it's obviously not the lower ranks of the OTO. Now, Leo Zagami, think what you want to of him. He is the only person I've ever come across that has referenced this prophecy in the Zohar that I'm speaking to. And it completely checked out. I've been transcribing it for so long. It's what he said there is true. He claimed, and he had documentation to show it, that Freemasonry and the OTO actually meet in these upper ranks, and that the lower ranks aren't aware. The grades, they don't even know about these, quote unquote, higher grades, right? And so if you watch Eyes Wide Shut and you see what seems to be an OTO ritual happening, sex magic in the higher grades of the OTO, you have Red Cloak, who's actually the producer of the film, sitting there wearing his mask, and he's got the two-headed phoenix behind him with the heads facing in the two directions, which is, symbolic of the Malkut at the base of the tree, the empire at the base of the tree, which is Shekinah, the sacred feminine, in exile. And she raises this is in the prophecy, it's communicating it through metaphor at a certain point, where it's describing Matat and Metatron as a bird's nest that's above the pillars. And it's saying when this happens, it sets in motion this return in another dimension of the stone that the builders rejected returning to its rightful place, which it communicates as this phoenix. And so why do we see everywhere in government, we see this eagle with its head always faced to the left? And it seems to be implying severity or Gevurah. But in the ascent, that's the path of the lightning flash. So we have to lean in this direction. But it seems more and more catastrophic and dismal the deeper that you go in that direction. But it's like a bubble that will eventually pop. Because if you're emphasizing the pendulum in that direction, it by necessity has to swing the other way. But it's saying it's not just that, okay, now we're going to be in the mercy. It's like, no, the two are going to become one. And it basically, I would say that the dark crystal, the end of the dark crystal, is like the most direct communication I've ever seen in film of this prophecy. I'm amazed that movie was even ever made. It's like it's like the pinnacle of a film about the Zohar. Besides Metropolis from the 1920s, I mean, that's all about the replicant that's in the place of the high priestess. The high priestess is put in exile, and she has this robot that is, a space holder for the meantime, and so.
So we have these two ideas that have come up. Well, it's really part of the same idea about what actually is strength, right? What we think of as strength is turned upside down, maybe is another way to say that. And then essentially the high priestess in exile. Those are essential to what's going on.
Completely. It's a question of what is real strength. And so every time I'm looking at what's going on in the media and people arguing about guns and everything, I'm just like, wow, it seems like this duality is like coming to a head, You still there?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. You can just mute it a second.
Yeah, I did. And that's, well, for me, that's been a central question in my life. That's been something that I've looked at various different angles, and both on a personal level and then on the, on the larger scale as well. And I don't, and like all of this that you're talking about, it's not the type of thing that you can get just by visiting that idea for once or twice. It's
right.
It's something that keeps coming back over and over, and then there's a different level of understanding about what that really, really means.
There's fundamental aspects to the thing that create the context. So, like, for example, if you didn't know that Tetragrammaton, Yud-Hey-Vav-Hey, is actually a family, that you have a father, a mother, a son, and a daughter. The two Heys are the two feminine aspects of, the principle of generation. I mean, obviously. But then when you see that they're telling you in, Jewish mysticism that the daughter has been put in exile, it's communicating what we know from the Golden Bough, that we used to have this matriarchy where everything was about the princess. And then, you'd have a stranger, a complete outsider of the lowest class by necessity, would challenge the king by pulling this bough off of this tree at the Lake of Nemi. It's Diana's Mere. And so he pulls this branch and he challenges the king. If he defeats the king in battle, which would often be more symbolically communicated, because the king is going to die a ritual death. So it's a given that the king is going down. The fool, it's where the archetype of the fool comes from. He marries the king's daughter and then rejuvenates the kingdom, which itself they related to as the tree, because the tree at Nemi they saw as a representation of the kingdom itself. And so this is a different use of royalty. Like, this is functional royalty, but it's all centered around the feminine. And so when you're looking at that cross on the tree of life, which is really a double cross, because you have the horizontals go both in the supernal and the terrestrial, is communicated as the Templar cross. We're looking at the sacrifice of the feminine, and this seems so rarely acknowledged. I'm amazed at how, Christianity, which is grafted onto the messianic tree, they say in the gospel that Jesus is the stone that the builders rejected, but that is traditionally taken to be an acknowledgement of the feminine. And so it became this whole other thing about like Socrates, where somebody is sacrificed by the state, and I find it fascinating that Kubrick did Spartacus, because one of Spartacus's main causes was he was opposed to the way that cities were being constructed, the layout of cities. And that's the big thing with Judea, is that it had a specific layout which served this function for rejuvenation of the kingdom. And so how is it, that he's sacrificed on a cross with all of his followers? It seems that the cross then, which is, as a pictograph, it's related to the last Hebrew letter Tav. It's like don't cross Rome on a basic level, but then you have everyone with crosses around their neck. It's like, wow, do they realize that that's a symbol of of the feminine. Like the G in from Freemasonry is Gimel. That's the square in the compass. Is you're looking at the conjunction of the supernal and the terrestrial, and what connects the two. What connects Keter to Tiferet? What connects the crown to the heart? This is in Metropolis, and says the mediator between the hands and the mind must be the heart, right? Otherwise, this empire isn't ultimately going to endure. If you want a functional empire, you have to have the connection. And so there's no question that that's what the Masonic G is meant to communicate, is Gimel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the sacred feminine, and yet we're told on the lower grades that this is either geometry or God or whatever. No, it's 7, because a movement's accomplished in 6 stages, and the 7th brings its return. But really, the Sabbath is a cycle of 7, which is kind of a cycle of 6, because the 7th is actually taken as the center. It's like a spindle, and the days they're rotating around it. And it's actually space. It's acknowledging that the center is transcendent. It's coming from another dimension. And that dimension from this side is unseen. Even though it's our own source. It's like it was communicated by Rilke, the poet, that if you have a rose, it's like all the petals he would relate to eyelids that are facing away from their source of life. So even though it's at the very center of ourselves and it's connecting us to everything, we can't help but relate to it as the least significant thing if our senses are all directed outward. That's the principle of yoga, is that you redirect the senses inward to see where they're coming from. It's in Sanskrit, it's neti neti. You say not this, not this. The path of negation is the path to liberation, right? And so it's they say in Sanskrit it's viveka kyakti. You say the discriminative intellect. It's what's required for development in yoga. So what's being discriminated is what stands out in space, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You recognize that it's cyclical, but that in the midst of it, there's something that's beyond it. It's like the symbol of Om. You have these 3 aspects to it. The upper stroke is Brahm, the creator. The lower stroke is Vishnu, the preserver, and the tail is Shiva, the destroyer. But then above them, you have this crescent, and the crescent is the transcendent point. It would be the Bindi point in the center of the 6-pointed star, which, when I was in India, I saw that star everywhere, and along with the swastika, and I found it really really something. I'm like, wow, the Star of David is everywhere. And it's Purusha Prakriti from Samkhya philosophy. You have spirit and matter conjoined, and you have this point at the center, which is acknowledging that the only way beyond is directly through. You have to have enough perspective and objectivity in a very real sense to be able to pierce the what's standing between you and yourself, in a sense. I mean, it's a paradox. It's hard to communicate that in words.
And it's the union of God and Goddess, or the sacred feminine and sacred masculine as well. That star, that upward triangle being God and the downward triangle being Goddess, or so. And that in a way has also been, I don't know if banished is really the word, but when you were talking about Jesus on a cross, and I was thinking about the high priestess or the being banished, and I was thinking about, well, that crucifixion turned into the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit replacing Maiden, Mother, and Crone. But we really need both, right? Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's a supernal triad. You can see you have Keter, Chochmah, and Bina, right? And so the meaning of it. I mean, you could argue this is an oral tradition that eventually was written down. We know the text that I'm looking at with this prophecy we know that it's from the 12th century at a minimum. It could very easily be from as early as the 2nd century. There's no way in hell that the guy who presented that actually wrote it himself. I mean, what that would take if you go into it, it's unbelievable. The Zohar, and the Takini Zohar, the repairs. It's not written like other texts. It's a phenomenon. And so, I mean, this is referenced by everybody, this text. And so whether it's the Golden Dawn, the OTO, Freemasonry, if you look at Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, they're all referencing this text, and it contains this prophecy with these specific elements that are not like, this isn't freaking Nostradamus here. This is it. And so right. The argument then for people in media or people in the music industry or wherever, why if you would be privy to this, if you're involved with any of these secret, not so secret societies, there's no translation that I know of that exists in English of this section. I can't find it, and so that's why I've been transcribing it for so long, because I really want to make it available, but it's difficult because it gets pretty complex. A lot of it is very math based,
real math. Yeah, the real stuff. What do you think the result or the role of unveiling this occulted knowledge to the masses? Is that all part of it as well? I mean,
it says something in it that really, in the commentary from Ramak, it makes a statement about not basically why to be patient with it. That it's like it's an explosive thing, and so there's the more that the other side culminates, the deeper effect it has on consciousness, and so that it's saying ignorance actually serves a real function, and so this then becomes the rationalization for people recognizing the need to keep it secret, so that because we're seeing things build and build and build, but it's kind of like if you had a fruit on a tree that's ripening, it ripens slowly over time, but then when it drops, it's sudden and irreversible. That's a metaphor used by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, who did I Am That. But it's that idea that something builds. And like Kubrick with Dr. Strangelove, he has this whole joke of the subtext is that it's like America and Russia are like, they're building towards intercourse, and then the explosion at the end is actually a giant orgasm. So he's relating to it clephotically because he's showing that it's a reversal. So it's just like in Full Metal Jacket when he's like, this is my rifle, this is my gun, this one's for shooting, this one's for fun. Instead of us relating to our actual creative expression as as what's significant, they turned it around through repression and sublimation to get people to relate to this gun, which is phallic, as though it were the thing of creation, even though it's a thing of destruction. And so, like traditionally, the four levels of the Klipot, are communicated as the four death penalties. So it's about a mirror. But the mirror doesn't have true dominance, even though it parades around like it does. It's fronting. It's like dubstep. Like, oh, it's totally a front. I don't buy it. And that's the thing about aggression is that it's built up around pain, and so there's deep pain in the world, and that people instead of having an aversion to facing that pain and letting it do what it needs to do, instead of allowing for a shift to occur, we avoid that. And as we avoid that, it escalates. But the thing is about that escalation, that is, at some point, it has to have a breaking point because of the nature of how things come into form. They're two sides of the same thing. It's basically the Emerald Tablet where you say as above, so below. Mm-hmm. The principle of the necessity of rejuvenation. You can't escape it in the grand scheme, and that then becomes a matter of what you take primary. I hate to quote Eckhart Tolle sometimes, but he actually made a really good point in The Power of Now. Where he's am I going to lose it? Trying to qualify, and shit. I'm live. Oh, I said the S word. I'm sorry.
That's all right. You just really try to avoid the F-bombs. So the S
Right,
word
that's the big one,
is
right?
kind of okay. Yeah. Well,
I haven't said it again and was unaware, did I?
No, you didn't. You've been great.
Okay, I'll just act like when I had to visit my ex-girlfriend's parents in Seattle.
There you go.
The whole trip, she's like, "Don't say it," and I was like, "Oh man, it's like it runs
so
in my
hard.
family too." Like my grandfather, I'm named after, is like every other word, you know. Yeah. Anyways, I don't even know.
When you were talking, I was thinking about my mentor that I studied with, Matthew Fox, Dr. Reverend Matthew Fox. He describes this spiritual journey as a fourfold path. So you have your via positiva, this awe and wonder, the mystical experience of oneness that we start out in, right? And then, that gets taken away. Pain, trauma, death, all of these things need to be faced. And he describes that as the via negativa, the dark night of the soul, which leads to the via creativa, our most creative part of our spiritual journey. And it's a spiral, it keeps going. So, and after the via creativa, we go into the via transformativa. So, and then back to awe again, back to the via positiva. But in Western culture, we don't face death. We don't face our pain. We don't face our trauma. So we're stuck and we can't create because we won't feel our pain. Like this is what you were just talking about. It stops our own spiritual growth and development on an individual level and on a massive scale as well.
Right.
So I just wanted to put that out there because that's what I was thinking about as you were talking, and before we got to Eckhart Tolle.
Eckhart Tolle was editing. I drew a blank. That's the best thing I ever drew.
Yeah. But
oh boy.
Yeah, that's where we're at. So, as a society, that's where we're stuck, and some of us are getting through our dark night of the soul, and we're going, look, it leads to this incredible creative thing. And then look, wow, it leads to even more transformation. And look, wow, it's leading me back to awe. You can keep going. You don't have to stay stuck in that because, when you won't face your pain and you won't face your trauma, that's a horrible place to be because you're in fear and you just live your life in fear, running from the pain that you won't feel. And that's way worse than just like feeling it and letting it go and moving on.
Right. Well, that has to do with that we project what will happen if we face this, and we're relating to that projection as though it were the other side. Mm-hmm. And so it's the principle of sacrifice. It's like if you know what it is that you're sacrificing something for, or at least you have some conceived projection of what you're going to get in return, then that's not a sacrifice. And that's the principle of the unknown. It's like you can't say, okay, well, I'm going to give this up for this. You give it up because you see the necessity to give it up. Mm-hmm. And what comes afterwards is the unknown. And that's, that's the crux of the issue,
Right. Right. It's, and that made me think that it's Sundance season. So, I was thinking about that this morning, about the meaning of the Sundance, and it's the most sacred community. I'm not going to say ritual, but it's really a ceremony, and the whole idea is that the Sundancers willingly sacrifice. They dance in the hot sun for 4 days without food or water, and then they go through the piercing round. So they willingly allow themselves to be pierced and stare into the sun for their vision and to sacrifice for life to continue. I mean, that's what the hope is there. But there's a willingness, and those who are called to dance do run from it for because it's pretty scary. Like, wow, I got to go do this thing, and who would, willingly do that? But when the spirit takes over,
right.
you have to.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the ghost dance over here, but yeah, that's a big one too.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it, but yeah, if you look up ghost dance, and that's referenced by Jim Morrison, one of my heroes. So it's pretty interesting. I'm curious, did you watch the film that did you see Schindler's List and Leonard Cohen's The Future?
No.
You didn't get time to watch it.
No, and I have a data issue because I live in the woods, and
right.
So I have, I have really crappy internet and data usage limits, and so I didn't get a chance. And plus, it's a Dropbox.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, basically, it's worth mentioning here because I don't know how many people listening to this are familiar with my work or my thing. That's why I'm kind of, other radio shows that I've done and other things that I did, I'm repeating a lot of the same information, which are, the real, key points. It's kind of like a bullet point presentation as best as I'm able in this short time span. But I've produced these films. I've been doing it for the last 20 years where I take albums that have a really strong resonance with certain films and I overlay them or put the film on mute. And I loop the album. It's the same thing as Dark Side of the Moon, The Wizard of Oz. And I've done this with thousands, literally, of films and albums to see what happens. And every so often, and it's been increasing in frequency, I find these crazy anomalies where it's like, wow, how could something go in sync to that degree where it becomes pretty unbelievable. And so that was one example. I have a folder in Dropbox 42 for members of thesyncbook.com where I uploaded these films. What's crazy is I was working on this sequel to Back to the Future Predicts 9/11 for Joe, and my whole hard drive just crashed, and I lost almost all of my work, and I'm not completely certain, I'm far from certain whether or not that work will be retrievable. But luckily in Dropbox 42, I've saved a lot of those, films. But I relate to this as a different way to approach media because I see a lot of media is like kind of I don't know. It's oriented in such a way that it's hard to relate to it as though it were malleable. Like when I approach Torah, I see that as an extremely malleable thing. It's alive. It's always changing. Even I could just say the Odyssey, the Upanishads, like these are texts that have a life of their own, and you can relate to them in different ways. And I see it as really liberating because it's like we're not spectators here. It's like if you go to Burning Man, you want to be a spectator. You can't. You can pretend to or something, but the thing you eventually get immersed in the thing. So I think it's a really healthy activity in approaching media to kind of almost like if you're reading to hieroglyphs or tarot, where you can see it this way and you can see it this way and you can explore it. And so I see that as a very helpful means to put the frickin' thing on mute and just give it a resonant soundtrack. But when it gets to points where it's like, how could that so many music changes correspond to so many scene changes and this many lyrics be this applicable, where it just like baffles the mind. I think it encourages the right brains. It's hard because of the way the language is structured, because I can't say, it allows the right brain to be dominant, because that's like an oxymoron. It's just I think it aids in a developmental type of objectivity. It allows for one to have perspective, because it's not so much about taking a position, it's more of an exploration. And this is a meditation for me that I've done for myself, and I love to share them, but I hated Schindler's List, and I liked it at the same time. It's one of the first books I ever read before I saw the film when I was in elementary school, when the book came out. And when I watched the film, my parents took me, even though I was underage, and I cried during the movie. But as I grew older, I was like, wow, there's certain things left out, like when the Warsaw Ghetto was infiltrated by the Nazis, they met with gunfire from the Jews, And this is left out of the film completely, but we know that this is true. It was the only time that I know of during World War II that the Jews actually fought back in a very real way. And so that day, by the way, was the day that LSD was discovered, day and year.
I was going to bring that up because...
Yeah, well, really?
Yeah,
so that's an example of Dionysian, Apollonian mutual interdependence, where you see this thing. It's like, Aldous Huxley dying at the same time as John F. Kennedy, it's like...
Yeah.
What the heck?
Stuff. And so when you can't plan this stuff.
Oh, right.
There's an organizing principle to all of it. But when you're talking about, basically you're training your brain to look at media as an exploration. When you're doing the music with the film, and just letting whatever correspondences or syncs or whatever that happen, and observing that. But the reason I was going to bring up LSD is because that's what a lot of people end up doing when they're on LSD is turning the sound down on a movie and turning up an album and then freaking out about like all of the syncs that happen between music.
Wheel of Fortune goes in sync really well with Dark Side of the Moon, whatever episode. But I mean, the thing is that everything goes in sync with everything else to an incredible degree sometimes. But what I'm interested in is the meaning, and so it's like irony. It's like you can't if something's ironic, that's subjective. Like you can point at it, but not everyone's always going to get the irony of certain things. It's a subjective experience. Yet at the same time, it can be relayed, and there's like the proof is in the pudding. Like if enough people recognize the irony, then it's that's the thing with Dark Side of the Moon and the Wizard of Oz. Whoever has seen that, it doesn't work to the same degree if you don't start it at the third roar. It will go in sync no matter what, and they're extremely resonant. But the third roar is the key. And you see that if you go through the 3 rounds. When she shows back up at the very end in her bed, and it's like, home, home again. I like to be here when I can. It's like, give me a break. How can that happen? And that thrill is something that I really live for. I love it when things just land that way, and I run the experiment, and then it does that. And I really love to share that. And you asked if there was a film to view, and I pointed you in that direction because I knew that no one had seen it all the way through, because I believe that if they had, they'd be contacting me, or telling me, "Holy cow, that blew my mind," because the ending is really something, it culminates. And so if you're watching the thing, because it goes through rounds, not every lyric will make as much sense unless it's, you're relating to it in certain ways. Like I see what Leonard Cohen is communicating is all Kabbalistic, and I'm familiar with that communication. So, like when he says there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. I mean, he's taking that directly from the rabbis, and so and that's what I relate to as Tisha B'Av. The destruction of the temple is like a giant crack in the apparent perfection of the kingdom. And so if you see that the kingdom is corrupt, that's things will shine through that crack, and it works through tragedy. And it's very strange that almost all of these, really, the most uncanny of these correspondences that I found with albums and films all deal with giant tragedies. What we would relate to as tragedy, and then it becomes very relatable to Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy, and these principles that are at play with the Seder chorus. People would go to these these plays, and they're all familiar with the plays. There's only so many of them, and the Seder chorus will literally drown out the sound of the actors. There's 3 sections to the I forget what you call it, but the theater, and they're singing, they're doing song over this play, and I'm like, wow, that's Dark Side of the Rainbow. That's like the thing, and it allows for the audience to relate to the play in a malleable way, so they're not just like relating to it, that they're watching the same thing over and over. I mean, these texts, the way that they're written are, they were a dynamic thing that were thought to be something that was changing because we're always relating to it in a different way. Kind of like in 12 Monkeys when Bruce Willis is watching Vertigo and he says like, I've seen this movie before, but it's like every time I see it, it's like I'm seeing something different, and that's the real significance. And that's why I love like Jake Coates's work and a lot of these sync films that people are doing, is that you're looking at something that's supposed to be a fixed narrative, and then you're seeing other narratives within that. And so my hope is that if that can be encouraged, if people do that exercise, they can recognize it in the narrative that we're being faced with in media, because these stories have truth in them, but they're sensationalized, and there's so many levels of lies and confusion that kind of contort the issue. But I see people utilizing these tragedies for different ends, and all kinds of people have different aims or whatever, but it seems like there's some planning that goes into them because it's all too convenient. It's like, they didn't like scramble together after the event and be like, okay, how do we make this about this? It seems it's more as like they're like setups or something. And, it's tough for people because if you don't go in and weed through all of the insanity and arrogant assumptions that are being projected from these commentators, if you don't set that out and just see what are the pieces that really don't fit and what are their significance, it's really easy to fall short of what it seems to ultimately be pointing to. And I'm still on the path. I don't know what's what, but I can see giant holes in a lot of these sensationalized events that are just like, I feel like they should be confronted. But at the same time, as I keep repeating, I'm not down with this jump to conclusions board. I think it's ridiculous, and I actually think it's dangerous. I think Alex Jones is dangerous. But I'm still hopeful in the midst of that. I see its purpose as well. Which is a tough thing to say, and I wouldn't have said that a few years ago, actually.
Yeah. So we have these two things going on. We have we're not relating to scripture or religious texts in a malleable way, nor are we to any type of media that we're consuming. So why do you think that is? What do you think it is that is stopping people? Because when we don't relate to religious texts in a, like you say, in a malleable way, revelation is something that's already happened. So we become closed to continued revelation. So when we go back to the scripture or the text, right, we already have in our mind what we're going to see there and interpret there, rather than it being an exploration of, well, what can I see in it today?
Yes. So, there's songs, like the Upanishads and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the Torah, obviously, and I was saying the Odyssey before. Like these are songs, like they're musical. I mean, that's a really big deal. It's like you're listening to this mythos that is kind of conveying these events that took place and taking certain liberties, but it's conjoined with the development of language. And that's what, Thoth Tarot is trying to get back to, is this, like, we're still thinking hieroglyphically, even though we don't really relate to it as such. It's that has taken less precedence as the analyzing that's on top of it. So we're receiving information through the subconscious, and then when we're interpreting that information and compartmentalizing it. So it's all about, where is the real, where's the value? It's like if you're relating to scripture and you're just reading translations in English, that can be a real problem, because it's so much about context and
yeah. In Aramaic, I mean, what an amazing cosmic language that is, which can't be really expressed in English. No,
neither can Sanskrit.
Yeah. So, but yet we have some sort of internal way of understanding beyond the language. Because there's another language there too, right? There's the math and the music.
Right. And it's not math like we think of math.
Right.
And that's a huge deal. People were speaking in number. This is an interesting point of meditation. Numeration. Sphero means numeration. It also comes from sapphire, right? But the spheres of the tree of life, those are a depth that are communicated as numeration because it's how things come into form. It's expressing that, whatever we're looking at, whether it's, any cycle in nature that you can represent mathematically, we represent it, but the description is not the described. That was one of Krishnamurti's huge points. It's like we're relating to the description as though it were what was being described. And when it comes to math, that's a real problem. And that's what I was saying earlier in the beginning of the conversation about this great tutor I had that introduced me to 2001. Is he taught me, he pushed me in the direction to like, no, before you do anything with math, it'll be dead and it won't have a point unless if you recognize what it means that we discovered numbers. They're a living thing. And so that what just happened with the stock market is absolutely blowing my mind because I really, I'm how can that happen? With the 777 phenomenon, it's absolutely out of control. With far-reaching implications. But the thing is that people want things explained to them. What is the significance? Like if you can put it into words. Like when I look at that, the way that I receive it, though I might after the fact be communicating it, obviously I have no other means but in language, but the way that I receive it, the insight that I experience, it's like a flash of, there's no way for me to articulate that. It's like Plato's The Cave when he goes back in and he's trying to communicate something through shadow language. And I'm not alone with this. A lot of people are experiencing this, and it seems to be practically exponential. And I think it has to do with the information age that we're living in. It's like what is happening with technology. I mean, we're connecting the whole globe together in an unprecedented way. But then this connectivity is secondary to the connections that are being made on a deeper level that we're inferring, even though it's more essential. It's like it's a total Ouroboros paradox, the way that functions. It's like that connection, those connections that we're seeing on that level are the external. It's as though we're looking at the skin of a snake and we're watching what's happening with the skin, and we can't recognize that what's the body that's emerging out of that skin is the real. I mean, that's what matters. That's what's continuing on. But we're like, oh my God, the skin is shedding. What the hell are we going to do? It's like it feels very traumatic. While at the same time, it's like, no, we're giving birth to something here, and it seems we're in the pains of that birth. It's like a big collective mind that's actually creating something that is actually ultimately unknown. Yeah.
And that's the exciting part, and the scary part is that we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
It's true.
That's where all the hesitation and all the anxiety and all of the guesswork, and that's where it's all coming from. Is we don't know. We don't know what's next.
It's true. We can only infer it. One of my favorite researchers, Scott Onstott, what I love about him is that when you start watching Secrets in Plain Sight, which is this incredibly long, brilliant documentary, and you're going through it and he's doing the Google Maps thing, he's taking all these measurements, most people will initially lean towards, oh, well, that's the Freemasons, that's a conspiracy, that's whatever, they'll go on and on with that. But then he reaches these points where he's measuring the continents. And it's like, wait a minute, if you're seeing this order in the continents, who planned that? That can't be, who's the mastermind behind that one? You know, so it's like if you keep going with it, it gets to this, you know, unbelievable level that really can't be denied. It's in your face if you really follow it through. And that's what I'm interested in, seeing what's happening with the information age and the way things are going. Because, you know, as it stands, the replication isn't what's all important. I mean, that's just whatever. I mean, that's doing what it's doing. I don't see it as that significant. But what's coming through it, or what it's pointing at, is extremely significant. It's like, you know, the master pointing at the moon, and everyone looks at the finger, you know, instead of the moon. You know, it's kind of like that.
It's kind of like that. So maybe we could, when I put this YouTube video out, maybe we could put a link on there to like some of your work that people could get access to. That would be wonderful. And I'll certainly spread it around. And is there any other, before we have like maybe five or so minutes, any other things you want to share about what's going on for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I just say that you know, those films in Dropbox and on Google Plus, which there's less of there. You know, the stuff in Dropbox is available for free download. I've, you know, put a whole lot of work into those guys. You know, and you know, I'd really be stoked to share some of that. You know. It's my passion, you know, and so it's sitting there, you know. I mean, the thing was that I had this Vimeo account with 36 videos, and some of them were just beginning to go viral. Like I had, you know, Jesus Christ Superstar with Marilyn Manson's Antichrist Superstar. It was like, it was taken off, and then I got it all shut down all at once, and I lost most of those videos. And so I've just been trying. What's that?
Is that for copyright stuff, or was that the issue?
I actually got a message from Vimeo telling me it was the FBI, and it tripped me out, because usually, I mean, from everyone I've talked to and what I've seen in the past, is it's like, oh, it's Disney, oh, it's Universal or whatever, and I got this like weird connection thing where I'm like, wait a minute, what? Why? What? It's just, you know.
FBI.
And so I was like, well, I guess I can do with that one, you know. And all those were album film things, you know, which were, you know, the cream of my crop. You know, I considered them all pretty uncanny, you know. And yeah, that was a bummer, you know. But I've had that happen throughout my life, you know. It's like I go and I do all this work, you know, and it ends up being this mandala, you know. I mean, I built mandalas, and you know, right. I've done, you know, the yajna ceremonies, you know, and it's like throwing the seeds into the fire, which are the samskaras, or the latent tendencies, you know, and then you know that you're doing something to be burned up. It's like Burning Man, you know. You build the third largest city in Nevada, and then you burn it all down. Mm-hmm. You know, you take it all apart, and that's that. And it's like, wow, what a giant rich mandala. But everything is like that, and our very life is like that. So I guess it's showing me the significance of it. I'm feeling less and less like what I'm able to get out there in terms of like information, like what we're doing here. Like I feel like there's work happening on other levels, and I'm learning to trust that, you know, that this has a purpose. You know, even if I lose everything, that it wasn't for naught. And I want to believe that the people that do actually die in these tragedies that are manipulated in all these different ways, that their lives aren't for naught, you know, that there something else comes through it, you know. I really, you know, I really feel that, honestly, that that there's more to it than this. It's not, I can't leave a tragedy as a tragedy, you know. I feel like things come of it, you know. It's like a demand for justice, not like courtroom justice, not like the stand-in justice, but like actual justice that's, you know, beyond our comprehension, my comprehension, you know. I'm open to that, you know, that things will be put aright because of the nature of a law of compensation that exists in the physics of the universe, if you can dig that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. But I say that justice is a murdered goddess. Um, so perhaps we
Yeah,
can
that's applicable.
reanimate her and bring her back to life. That's
Yes,
my hope.
ma'am. I hope you speak ma'am well. I say ma'am a lot. I say sir a lot. I know
Yeah,
that not all women like to be called ma'am, but there's not that many names of respect for a woman.
true.
Like men will always receive sir. I was hanging out recently at the first party I've been to in a year actually with this 8-year-old who it's the only life I've ever saved in my life. I was in a basement and she'd opened the door in the middle of the night. We were at this party. There was a baby, and this is years ago, 8 years ago, and she was falling down the stairs. And I literally, was having a dream that I was waking up from of that scene from Exorcist, where she's crawling backwards down the stairs. And I leapt up and I grabbed this little girl. Oh, am I getting cut out? Can't finish my story.
Yep.
Oh, no.
Thank you so much for coming.
It's okay.
Okay, so it's Tuesday morning, and I'm preparing the podcast for tonight's replay on People's Internet Radio. And I just wanted to finish off the story that David was telling when the show ended, the live show. So he's at a party at a friend's house. Everybody is sleeping in the basement, and he's sleeping in a sleeping bag, and he's having a dream about the scene in The Exorcist where Regan's crawling backwards. And I think it's down the stairs as well. So while he's having this dream, his friend's baby opens the basement of the basement door and basically starts falling down the stairs. He wakes from this dream, stands straight up and catches this baby in the middle of the air. 8 years later, he runs into his friends again, and they're like, "Oh, this is the guy that saved your life." And so he connected to this little girl who told her all about Sync, and she really got it. And kids really do get it. I talk to my son about Sync all the time, and he's really into it. And he brings up Syncs to me. He tells me all kinds of stuff about his Syncs. And so for me, I'm outside playing with my dogs. Come on, babies. Here's the Syncs for me. Over the past 9 days, I've rescued 3 baby animals. The first was a fawn that a doe had left in our pasture, which they typically do. They leave their fawns for like 10 hours a day, typically, while they go do their deer things, their foraging and what have you. So the dogs found this little newborn fawn, and they don't run away. What they do is they just try to hunker down and just get away from whatever's bothering it. And so with its little long legs, it kind of looked like, to the dogs, it looked like it just wanted to play, because that's how the dogs get down, on with their front paws sticking out and their butt in the air. So they kept trying to play with this poor little fawn, and it was pretty traumatized. So I just picked it up, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take the dogs inside so they stop bothering it, and I'll come back down and put it back where I found it. And so I take the dogs inside. The fawn, the little deer, didn't make a peep the whole way while I was carrying it to the house. But as soon as I opened the door and it, I don't know, got all the smells of like the 5 cats and 2 dogs and 3 humans that live in our house, it started crying. And its cry woke up my husband from a deep sleep. And he walked out of the bedroom and was like, "Am I dreaming?" Because I'm standing there with the baby deer in my arms. And so I told him what was going on. I went right back out after I put the dogs away and put the fawn exactly where we had found it. And the mom came and got it later that day, so everything was cool. And then the Sunday following the show, the live show, day before yesterday, I was driving, and I just happened to spot a baby bunny that was on the side of the road, kind of hopping in a circle. And I just immediately stopped. I was like, there's something wrong. I can't leave it there. And at first I thought maybe a car had nicked it or something, but when I investigated further, it was in an area that had been freshly weed whacked, and it got weed whacked in the head. Basically, it had a little head injury, and one of the eyes was slightly impacted by the injury. So I picked the bunny up, and we finished driving home, and I was with my son, and he was really freaked out. He couldn't. I was like, "Can you hold him while I drive?" And he's like, "No, I'm sorry, I can't, Mom. I'm just too freaked out. I can't do it." So we took the bunny over to Blue Ridge Wildlife Rescue, and we hadn't been there in 6 years, but my husband remembered the way. So then yesterday, I noticed, I had been noticing a woodpecker on one of our hummingbird feeders. It just hung out there like all the time, and so I was watering my garden, and the woodpecker, this baby woodpecker, just was hanging out on the feeder, and it started showing me that it wasn't right. It had a broken wing. So I'm assuming it fell out of its nest and broke its wing. So I've got that woodpecker right now that I'm waiting for the Blue Ridge to open up. It's about 6:30 in the morning. It opens in a couple hours, and I can bring it down there to get taken care of. But yeah, I mean, I've rescued animals my whole life, but 3 baby animals in 9 days is kind of a lot for me. So that's the theme, man. Rescuing babies. All the babies are all our babies. And they all need our kindness and love and nurturing. Thanks so much for listening to my show, and I really appreciate it. And I hope that I can continue to talk to really cool people. Thanks, everyone.